My stepson screamed, "You're a stranger to us. Don't you dare boss me around." In response, I cut him off from insurance, canceled his memberships, and stopped covering the payments for his gadgets. His mother was the first to call, but he never got any help from her. Hit subscribe, drop your own stories in the comments, and let's begin. I used to believe patience could bend stone, that kindness could stitch together bloodlines split apart by divorce and distance. I thought if I stood steady long enough, providing, listening, never raising my hand in anger, Rachel's children would learn to see me as more than a stranger sharing their kitchen table. I was wrong. Some kids mistake care for weakness. They taste generosity and call it obligation. They take every gesture, every sacrifice, and write it off as a debt owed, not a choice freely given. My name is Michael. I'm 42 years old, and I speak now as a man who spent too much of his life confusing endurance for love. I have 2 children from my first marriage. Ellie, 10, whose energy carries like sparks in a dark room, and Jake, 8, already stubborn, already learning to stand with a kind of silent defiance that reminds me too much of myself at that age. Their mother and I ended long ago, and though the divorce cut deep, it was clean, final. I left with visitation rights, obligations, child support, things that carried weight but also boundaries. Even in the ruins of marriage, there was clarity. Rachel entered my life 3 years ago, and with her came her own family, if you can call it that. She had 2 children of her own. Austin, 16 now, and Maddie, 14. Teenagers caught between the raw confusion of youth and the bitterness that comes when you realize adults are fragile, fallible, and break their promises more often than they keep them. They were old enough to see me not as a father, not even as a partner to their mother, but as an intruder, an interloper in a world they still clung to, even as it collapsed around them. Their father, Robert, lives not far. 10 minutes drive if the lights favor you, 5 if you speed through the neighborhood the way he always does. His presence lingers in their lives like cigarette smoke. Thin, choking, impossible to ignore. He shows up when it suits him. A birthday here, a holiday there. A school game where he claps too loud in the stands so everyone knows he came. And then he disappears again, retreating into whatever life he has chosen over his children. He is a ghost who wants credit for being a father without paying the cost. And yet, despite all that absence, despite the unpaid bills, the broken promises, the long silences that stretch across months, Robert holds their loyalty. His blood buys him indulgence. His absence makes him myth. He can walk into a room after 3 months gone and still hold their gaze like some fallen king returned from exile. And me? I can work double shifts, keep the heat on, repair their broken laptop, pay for new clothes, sit through parent-teacher conferences, and still I am not him. I am never him. At first, I told myself I could live with that my job wasn't to replace him, but simply to show up where he didn't. That, in time, respect would grow like moss, slowly but inevitably covering every cold stone wall between us. I believe children, no matter how stubborn, eventually recognize the ones who stand firm. I believed they would come to see me as steady ground. But belief is a dangerous thing. It can keep a man chained to illusions long after the truth has cut him free. I remember our first year together vividly. Rachel and I married quickly, too quickly maybe, though at the time it felt like a reprieve. I was tired of being alone, tired of splitting weekends with Ellie and Jake, tired of the cold silence of an empty house where family photos from my first marriage still hung like ghosts. Rachel was warm, open, her laughter quick and disarming. She carried scars, yes, but she wore them like medals, proof she had survived. We told ourselves we could build something together, something better than what had broken behind us. The children didn't share our conviction. Ellie and Jake were cautious at first. My daughter clung to my side, eyeing Rachel with the wary gaze only a child can muster, as if testing whether this woman was a threat to the little world she still held on to me, her brother, the fragile remnants of what once was home. Jake, quieter, withdrew into himself. He asked fewer questions, watched more, hid behind Ellie whenever tension rose. But with time, they softened. Rachel made an effort. She was patient with them, tried to carve out moments that belonged only to them. Baking cookies, movie nights, Little gestures that didn't erase their doubts but eased them. They began to accept her. Not fully, not easily, but enough. Austin and Maddie were different. They didn't soften. They didn't yield. They held themselves like heirs whose throne had been usurped. Austin especially carried an air of defiance, as if my very presence was a challenge to be met. Maddie followed his lead, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp, but always in alignment with her brother. It was them against me, no matter how many dinners I paid for, how many bills I covered, how many chores I did in silence while they treated me as furniture. I should have seen the signs. I should have known from the first day that they weren't simply adjusting, that their hostility wasn't just the natural awkwardness of teenagers forced into a new family dynamic. But I told myself stories. I said patience would fix it. I said time heals, that wounds close, that teenagers grow up. But not all wounds close. Some fester. Some infect the entire body until the only way to heal is to cut deep. At night, lying beside Rachel in the dim glow of the street lamp outside our window, I told myself we were building something solid. She whispered reassurances. That the kids would come around. That Austin just needed time. That Maddie would follow when she saw her brother soften. I believed her because I wanted to, because the alternative was unbearable. That no matter how much I gave, no matter how many years I poured into this family, I would never be more than a stranger tolerated at their table. But time proved me wrong. And it started earlier than I care to admit. The first red flag arrived like a crack across glass. Sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. It was 6 months after we moved into the same house. 6 months of dinners eaten in tense silence. 6 months of me pretending every shrug from Austin, every eye roll from Maddie, was just the turbulence of adolescence. 6 months of me convincing myself that if I just kept showing up, they would eventually see me as more than a paycheck and a nuisance. Then came the day Austin stood in the living room, shoulders squared, jaw clenched, eyes full of disdain, and spit out words that cut clean through any illusion I still carried. "You're not one of us. Don't tell me what to do." The air went still. Maddie froze beside him, her lips twitching between a smirk and a gasp. My own children, Ellie and Jake, sat on the couch wide-eyed, caught in the crossfire of a war they hadn't asked for. And Rachel said nothing. She looked at her son, then at me, and stayed silent, as if her voice had been stolen. Something in me cracked that day, though I didn't admit it yet. From that moment on, Austin treated me as though my presence were a personal affront. He made no effort to hide his contempt. When I asked him to mow the lawn, he laughed. When I reminded him to do his homework, he turned up the music in his room until the bass rattled the walls. When I asked him to put his plate in the dishwasher, he left it on the table, half-eaten, daring me to touch it. Maddie followed his lead, though her rebellion was quieter. She left her clothes scattered across the living room, spilled soda on the carpet and walked away, dropped her shoes in the hallway where everyone tripped over them. It wasn't the chaos of ordinary teenagers. It was deliberate, sharpened by intention. Every mess was a message, you don't matter here. And it wasn't just me they targeted. Ellie and Jake became casualties in this quiet war. Austin whispered to them when he thought I couldn't hear, telling them, "Only real parents make the rules." Maddie chimed in, repeating it with a cruel smile. "He's not even your dad anymore. Why should you listen to him?" I saw the confusion in my children's faces. Jake, only 8, looked at me with questions too heavy for a boy his age. Ellie grew quiet, hesitant, as though afraid to speak in case she revealed her loyalty to the wrong side. Their small world, already fractured by divorce, was being poisoned further by 2 teenagers who understood that words can cut deeper than fists. Meals became battlegrounds. I would cook dinner, pasta, roasted chicken, homemade chili, and Austin would push the plate away with exaggerated disgust. "This tastes like garbage," he'd say, reaching for the cereal box instead. Maddie laughed at his cruelty, shoving the food around on her plate until Rachel sighed and excused them both from the table. I sat there watching Ellie and Jake pick at their meals, trying not to cry, trying to pretend that everything was fine because they didn't want to add to the weight pressing down on me. My own children learned silence as survival, and I hated myself for letting it happen. Even the smallest routines turned into reminders of my insignificance. When I asked Austin to turn down the TV, he stared at me like I was invisible, then yelled for his mother. She would appear, her voice tired, and repeat my words for him, as if only her authority could reach him. And he would obey her, never me. Maddie did the same, waiting for Rachel's voice before moving a single inch. That became the rhythm of our days. I spoke, they ignored, Rachel translated. My words carried no weight unless filtered through their mother's mouth. Do you know what that does to a man? To be treated as if your presence is a suggestion, your authority a shadow that vanishes in sunlight? To watch your own children absorb the message that you are powerless in your own home? It hollows you out. It takes whatever dignity you thought you had and grinds it into dust. Rachel excused it. Every time she excused it. They're teenagers, she said. They're adjusting. It's not personal. She wanted me to swallow the disrespect like medicine, bitter but harmless. But disrespect is never harmless. It spreads, festers, and it teaches everyone in the house that cruelty has no consequences. There was one night I can't forget. I had worked a 12-hour shift, my back aching, my hands still stained with grease and ink from the machines I'd been fixing. I came home to find the kitchen a disaster. Crumbs across the counter, empty chip bags on the floor, soda cans tipped over and bleeding sticky trails. I said nothing at first. I cleaned. I wiped and scrubbed and stacked dishes, telling myself it wasn't worth a fight. Then Austin walked in, scrolling on his phone, and dropped his shoes in the middle of the freshly cleaned floor. Not by accident, not carelessly. He looked at me, smirked, and kicked them farther into the room. "Pick those up," I said, my voice low. He didn't move. He didn't even look up. "You're not my dad. You don't tell me what to do." The words burned like acid, but what made it worse was Maddie's laughter from the doorway. She was watching, amused, feeding on the humiliation. And behind me, Ellie and Jake had stopped in the hall, frozen, listening to the collapse of their father's authority. Rachel came in then, her voice sharp but tired. "Austin, pick up your shoes." And he did. Not for me. Never for me. For her. Always for her. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the quiet walls of the house I had paid for. Every corner held echoes of their disdain. Every chair, every plate, every door reminded me that I had built a home only to be treated as a guest in it. I told myself to be patient, that time would fix it, that if I endured, if I kept feeding them, clothing them, paying for their lives, something would shift. But the truth is, time doesn't heal contempt. It sharpens it. And the contempt in that house was growing sharper by the day. The breaking point did not arrive with a scream. Came with a crash. I had just come home from work, my shirt soaked with sweat, my shoulders aching from hours of lifting what no one else wanted to lift. I walked through the door expecting the usual. The cold silence of teenagers behind closed doors, the hum of the television filling the gaps Rachel wouldn't. Instead, I found my son Jake standing in the hallway, his face pale, his hands trembling as he pointed toward his bedroom. "He broke it," Jake whispered. "He smashed it on purpose." I pushed past him and saw the wreckage. His model airplanes, the ones we had spent months building together, shattered across the floor. Wings bent, paint chipped, fragile pieces trampled under a boot. I felt the air leave my chest, replaced by a cold fury that spread like fire. Austin leaned against the wall, arms crossed, that same smirk carved into his face. "What's the problem? They're just toys." I stared at him, silent, waiting for the smallest flicker of remorse. It never came. Instead, he shrugged and added the final blow. "You're nobody. You don't matter. And your kids don't matter either." That was the moment something inside me died. The patience I had clung to for 3 years rotted in an instant. All the excuses, all the whispered reassurances from Rachel that they'll come around, collapsed like a lie finally revealed. If I was nobody, then I would live as nobody. The next morning, before dawn, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen reflecting off empty coffee cups. I pulled up every account, every bill, every subscription tied to my name. Austin's car insurance, gone. Maddie's streaming services, canceled. Gym memberships, phone bills, the online gaming accounts I had been paying for without a word, all cut off, severed with a few keystrokes. By the time the sun rose, I had erased myself from their lives in the only language they truly understood: money. When Austin came downstairs and tried to use his phone, the first call went to his mother. "Mom, my data's not working. Did you forget to pay the bill?" Rachel turned to me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Michael." I didn't flinch. "I stopped paying." The words hung heavy in the air. Rachel blinked, confused, as if she hadn't heard me right, but Austin understood. His smirk faltered, his face tightening. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash the same venom as always, but I cut him off. "You told me I'm nobody," I said, my voice sharp enough to slice through the morning silence. "If I'm nobody, then my responsibilities end here. From now on, your father can pay for your life." The color drained from his face. Maddie, standing in the doorway, froze. For the first time in years, neither of them had a quick retort, no easy insult ready to spit. Rachel's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "Michael, you can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. And I did. That evening, the storm broke. Austin's video game subscription failed. His gym card was declined. His insurance lapsed. He shouted, slammed doors, cursed me in words Rachel refused to punish. Maddie cried when her phone stopped working, wailing that she couldn't text her friends, that her life was over. And through it all, Rachel kept trying to reason with me, her voice trembling with outrage. "You can't punish them like this," she hissed, cornering me in the kitchen after the kids stormed upstairs. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I'm not punishing them. I'm listening to them. They said I'm nothing. If I'm nothing, then nothing is what they'll get from me." Rachel's face twisted in anger, but she had no answer. She had enabled their cruelty for too long, allowed them to believe my sacrifices were endless, bottomless, unquestioned. Now the bottom had been cut away, and everyone was falling. The days that followed were chaos. Austin raged. He threw things in his room, called Robert for help, only to be met with vague excuses and broken promises. Maddie sulked, sulking turned to screaming, and screaming collapsed into tears when no one swooped in to fix it. The first real confrontation came 3 days later, when Austin stood in front of me holding his broken phone. "You need to fix this," he demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of entitlement stripped bare. I looked at him, calm, almost cold. "No, I don't." His face reddened. "You can't just stop. You've been paying for everything. You don't get to quit now." I stepped closer, my voice dropping low, deliberate. "You told me I don't matter. You told me I'm not one of you. If that's true, then my money doesn't matter either. So go ask the man who is your father. Go ask Robert." For the first time, his eyes flickered, not with defiance, but with something else. Fear. He tried to cover it with rage. "This is bullsh*t. You're ruining my life." "No," I said, steady as stone. "I'm letting you live it without me." The fallout was immediate. Robert, when called, gave excuses. "Money's tight," he told Austin. "I'll see what I can do." But what he could do never amounted to more than empty promises. Within a week, Austin's gym membership remained unpaid, his phone cut off, his insurance canceled. Maddie, stripped of her comforts, grew quiet. They were children who had lived soft, sheltered lives, suddenly forced to taste the sharp edges of consequence. Rachel begged. She pleaded with me at night, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, Michael, just fix it. Just this once. They're kids, they don't understand what they're saying." I shook my head. No, they understood perfectly. They understood every time they told me I don't belong here. They knew what they meant. Now they'll learn what it costs. The house grew heavy with silence, punctured by outbursts of anger and tears. Austin stopped mocking my meals because there was no longer food in the fridge bought with my card. Maddie stopped leaving her messes in the living room because I stopped cleaning them. Every gesture of defiance turned hollow when there was no foundation beneath it. And slowly the balance shifted. Austin stopped looking at me with open contempt. Maddie stopped laughing at my humiliation. They both grew quieter, their voices carrying hesitation where once they carried venom. They had tested the strength of my patience for years, and now they were learning that even patience has teeth. The day Austin came to me, his voice subdued, his eyes avoiding mine, I knew the tide had turned. "Can we talk?" he muttered. For the first time, he wasn't mocking me. He wasn't spitting venom. He was a boy stripped of his armor, facing the man he had called nobody, realizing that nobody had the power to make his world collapse. But I didn't smile. I didn't soften. I let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of the choices he had made. Because consequences aren't lessons unless they cut deep. And he was finally bleeding. The silence didn't break quickly. It stretched for weeks, thick and suffocating, filling the house like smoke after a fire. Austin sulked in his room, stripped of his privileges. Maddie tried sulking too, but the reality of living without comforts, the frozen phone, the canceled streaming accounts, the absence of fast food money, quickly eroded her performance. Rachel tried to hold the pieces together, but every word she spoke to me carried an edge, as though I were the one who had broken something sacred. But I hadn't broken it. I had only stopped holding up a house of lies. And slowly, painfully, the teenagers began to realize it. The first apology was clumsy, almost accidental. Maddie came into the kitchen one evening, where I stood at the counter packing lunches for Ellie and Jake. She hovered in the doorway for a long time before speaking, her voice small, hesitant. "Do you want me to help?" I looked at her, waiting for the smirk, the mocking twist of her lips that usually followed. But it didn't come. She reached for the bread, for the peanut butter, moving quietly beside me as though afraid to scare off her own courage. We didn't speak much, but when she was done, she whispered, "Thanks for buying all this stuff. I know you don't have to." The words were awkward, but they were a crack in the wall she had built. Austin took longer. He spent weeks pacing like a caged animal, his anger collapsing under the weight of reality. His calls to Robert went unanswered. His texts were ignored. For the first time, he was forced to confront the truth he had spent years avoiding, that his biological father was never going to be the man he wanted him to be. One night, I heard his voice outside my door, low, hesitant. "I'm sorry," just 2 words, but they weren't spoken with contempt. They weren't muttered under his breath. They were deliberate. I didn't open the door. I let him walk away with the words still hanging in the air, unanswered. Because an apology, spoken once, isn't enough to erase years of venom. Respect isn't born in a single night. It is rebuilt brick by brick through actions, through consistency, through submission to rules he once mocked. And slowly, the actions began to change. Austin cleared his plate after dinner without being asked. Maddie picked up her shoes from the hallway. When I spoke, they listened, not always happily, not always with enthusiasm, but they listened. They no longer turned to Rachel for confirmation, no longer waited for her to translate my words into commands worth following. My authority, dismissed for so long, had finally been recognized. It was never about love. I didn't need their love. I had Ellie's laughter, Jake's trust, the small, fragile devotion of children who still believed in me. What I needed from Austin and Maddie was respect. And for the first time, I felt it flicker to life. Rachel noticed the change too. At first, she tried to soften it, tried to rewrite the story into something gentler. "They're just growing up," she said. "Teenagers mature. They're starting to understand." But I knew better. This wasn't maturity. This was survival. This was the realization that words have cost, and they had finally been forced to pay it. One night, after the dishes were cleared and the house had gone quiet, Rachel sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her voice was softer than it had been in months. "You were right," she admitted. "They needed to see the consequences. I didn't think it had to be this hard." I looked at her, my hands folded on the table. Respect isn't hard. It's the easiest thing in the world. All they had to do was give it. She nodded, her eyes lowered. She didn't argue. From then on, the house felt different. Boundaries were drawn in stone, not in whispers. My rules carried weight. My words were no longer suggestions. And though Austin and Maddie still carried their scars, still clung to the shadows of their father's ghost, they no longer dared to spit in my face while feeding from my hand. That was enough. But here's the truth I can't ignore. Something in me had changed too. The man who once believed patience could earn respect was gone. In his place stood someone colder, sharper, unwilling to confuse generosity with obligation ever again. I learned that love without respect is slavery, that patience without boundaries is weakness, and that sometimes the only way to teach a lesson is to let them choke on the consequences of their own words. Austin and Maddie learned it the hard way. Maddie lost her comforts. Austin lost his illusions. And both of them learned that calling me nobody didn't make me vanish. It made their world collapse. In the months that followed, we rebuilt something resembling order. Not love, not harmony, but order. Ellie and Jake no longer lived in the shadow of mockery. They saw me stand firm. They saw me refuse to bend. And maybe one day, when they are grown, they will remember that their father did not allow himself to be broken by contempt. Austin and Maddie still test the edges, still carry the scars of loyalty to a father who never shows up. But they no longer spit in my face. They no longer dare to call me nobody. They have learned, as all children eventually must, that words carry weight. And when they cut deep enough, they cut away the very things you depend on. The house is quieter now. Not peaceful, not warm, but quiet. And in that quiet, I find a kind of strength. So I ask you, whoever hears this story, was I wrong? Was I cruel for cutting them off? For refusing to carry the weight of their contempt? Or was this the only way left to teach them what Rachel never could? That respect is the foundation of family, and without it, everything collapses. Tell me, what would you have done?